just going to leave about a minute or so just for everyone to kind of pile in, especially if you're coming in from the session before. We are going to be recording this session, so if you do want to introduce yourself in the comments below, we're not going to read them out, but if you do want to introduce yourself, now would be the time to do it. Let us know if you've been to other sessions so far, what you think of the festival. We're on day 2 now. We've got an entire week ahead. We're running in all the way up to Sunday afternoon. So loads and loads of different stuff to do. But like I say, we'll just begin shortly, just let people make their way in. You guys all got a cup of coffee or a cup of tea?
Too much coffee today already. I'm all coffeeed out.
Oh, coffeeed out. Is there such a thing? Maybe.
I'm feeling that thing right now, actually.
Well, we're about 71. I think we'll just begin. People can just join intermittently as well. So yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Developing Trends in the Media Industry. I'm Mila. I'll be the host of the session. I'm part of the Student Publication Association. And I've got our lovely panelists here. I'm joined by Lucy, Jack, and Lydia. Just before we begin, just a quick intro into how the session will work. We are in a Zoom webinar, so we cannot see you, but we can interact with you through the chat feature. So if you have any questions for us, you can use the chat. And there is also a specific Q&A section. You can upvote different questions. So if you're about to ask questions already been asked, just give it an upvote, and we'll know just to pay attention to that one more and ask it a bit earlier on. We are scheduling to end the session around 10 to 2. But if you do want to continue the chat, we do have a coffee shop table. We're at table 2. I'll post a link later on. And we can carry on chatting in there. You can share any experiences and any other comments and questions that you might have. And like I said earlier, the session is being recorded. So if there's anything that you wanted to ask, but you don't want it recorded, perhaps the coffee shop session will be the best place for that. I am also taking questions offline. I've had a couple on emails already, and also you can hashtag StudentOpsFest on Twitter. If you want to send in an offline question, it's communications@spajournalism.com. I appreciate you may get disconnected just with the way that we're all using webinar, and there are quite a lot of people on it already. So without further ado, I do also want to let, stop sharing. I do also want to let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. So we do have Lydia, Jack, and Lucy. I think we'll just go with the order on the title card. So we'll go Lucy and then Jack and Lydia. But if you could just tell us a little bit more about what you do and who you are.
Hi, I'm Lucy Ingham. I'm the editor of verdict.co.uk, which is a technology news site, and I also edit a number of digital magazines. So I'm in charge of a team and to do day-to-day news operations, that kind of thing.
Is it my turn, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Firstly, I want to apologize. I bizarrely have had helicopters flying over my house like nonstop for the week. So if they do another flyby, which I know that they've been doing every day at about 1:45-ish, I'm really sorry. It's been a very, very strange week for me for this reason. But I guess that's living in London now. But anyway, my name is Jack Williams. I am the editor and co-founder and chief communications officer at Underpinned, which is a tech platform for freelancers. We have an online magazine that essentially I've been dreaming about running throughout my time at university and afterwards as well, and finally had the opportunity to do so. That essentially gives all sorts of advice and little tidbits for people looking to continue their freelancing careers and to start their freelancing careers and do all that sort of fun stuff. And that is very inclusive of journalists and writers as well, because a large portion of our platform are journalists and writers. So that's me, that's my spiel. Nice to meet you guys.
Guess it's my turn then. Hi, I'm Lydia. I am a freelance journalist. I'm also a blogger and newsletter writer. I'm on the autistic spectrum, so that's kind of been my niche ever since I finished with my NCTJ, though I did originally want to go into reporting. Right now, I am raising a small sum of money so I can commission other autistic writers and illustrators, and that's it.
Fab. Welcome everybody, and welcome everybody on the chat as well. There's been quite a few people who've been introducing themselves, so say hi, join in the chat. If you missed any of the intros from our speakers, I've just posted some of their either social media or magazine pages on, so you can have a look at any of the stuff that they do. So just kicking off the session, I think it'll be quite interesting to chat about routes into the media industry and also potential alternative routes. A lot of our SPA members are students who may not necessarily do journalism as their degree, but they are very passionate about journalism and they want to get involved. People have been self-learning, especially right now when we're all stuck inside. There's loads of online courses that you can take. But what are kind of your thoughts on getting into the industry and ways that you can get in that are perhaps different to just the standard university routes? Lucy, I'll start off with you again. We'll just go to Jack and Lydia.
Sure. So actually, first of all, I didn't do a journalism degree. My degree is actually in anthropology. What I did do, and this is something that I found really good and is definitely worth looking into, is do a postgraduate short course where you do a very on-the-job, like hands-on training focus. And I think that is a very effective way of getting all the skills you need to go into it. Having said that, I don't think it's the only way, and there's by no means one right way to go. And I mean, of my colleagues, a lot of them don't have degrees. Some of them have degrees in English or history and things like that. There's quite a wide mix. The most important thing, I think, is to look out for opportunities where you can kind of get going. For example, my company runs a graduate scheme which doesn't require you to have any particular kind of qualifications in journalism. It's more about showing you have a kind of capability of writing and interest in that kind of thing. And I think it's really, getting some bylines in something to get you going, and then kind of just trying to look for any experience that you can to build on that is the most important thing from my point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that experience is key in so many ways here. And I think that the thing that we're probably going to return to in a lot of ways in this conversation is, and it was a question, correct me if I'm wrong, Mila, but it was a question that was asked while we were offline in the sort of limbo area before the chat actually started, that how do newsrooms of the future diversify themselves? And I actually think this is a very important aspect of diversification, as well as actually education and skill set too at the same time. Is that so? For me personally, I have an English degree, and I brush up on the things that my colleagues learned about journalism at university before we really started the editorial process at underpinned. And my sort of realization was there's so much amazing stuff that you're learning here, but actually the expectation is very much on you to come in with your own skill set as well. And actually coming in with a pure journalism skill set is going to be useful in a lot of ways, but you are not going to be able to answer all of the questions. All of the questions that are asked of you when you start out as a journalist, if you are purely relying on your journalism degree. So I think things like social media marketing, right? Having that ability nowadays, especially in SEO as well, if you're writing for online publications, is absolutely massive. Like that's something that when we're commissioning work, when we're getting pitches from writers, that's something that I continually look for is an experience with SEO, because from my perspective, that means when I go through the editing process, we're entirely online. Like I have no interest in doing a print magazine anytime soon. Whenever I'm talking to somebody about writing for us, I always look for SEO experience, because it just means that when it comes to the publication day or the week building up to the publication day, I know that I don't have to go through the process of implementing keywords and doing basic SEO tasks in order to make the piece SEO compatible as well. So, and I think this is a difficult thing because it's a little bit of a specialization, but actually finding that specialization early, once you've established an interest in it, and then building up off of that would be hugely beneficial for recent graduates as well, especially recent graduates who are competing against other journalism graduates for key positions.
I'm just going to sort of jump on the back of that. As a disclaimer, and I must admit, I do feel a bit of an imposter on this panel. I didn't actually go to university. As an autistic person, I had a really bad time in education, and I didn't really find any campuses that offered the adequate levels of support. At the same time, before I had gone to college, I was doing a lot of work experience. the news editor of the female section at the Daily Mail basically took me into his office and commanded that I would go and do an NCTJ, and get the skill set and basically keep in my contacts book. The NCTJ, I would say, is probably more accessible to some people, such as myself. I was very lucky. I had a bursary from the Journalism Diversity Fund. In terms of alternative routes, it's been amazing to watch, because since I graduated, a lot more companies are offering more opportunities that are very similar, rather than saying you need a degree. So as an example, Yahoo News is offering applications for someone to do their NCTJ and come and work for them. The Telegraph is doing something very similar.
That is really, really interesting that you've mentioned all those things. Because actually I had a question through about kind of an offline question and also an online question on the chat. But the one on here from Misha. Hi everyone, do you have any advice for someone with a background in film, arts, culture looking to freelance? And we get that quite a lot, that if your background isn't specifically, if your background is a niche, what are kind of the best ways to approach publications, perhaps if you've not done any previous work with them, and kind of do almost a cold pitch or anything else like that? What would you recommend?
Oh, do you mind if I start off with this one? Is that all right? Because this
Go for it. The freelancer should.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, that's honestly, like, it's the question that gets rooted to us pretty consistently. I have X niche and experience, and how do I make myself interesting to these platforms? I would say that the first thing that you should be aware of, 100%, and you might already know this. Sorry, Mila, could you tell me who asked the question?
It's Misha on the chat. I don't have any other details.
That's fine. Misha, like, the first thing that I would say is that every editor is expecting cold pitches. Like, that is, there's no reason to feel shy. And I totally understand if you do, because even when I send out the few pitches that I have time to send out, do still feel a little bit daunted when I get to that process. But they are expecting cold pitches from every walk of life. And actually, again, coming back to this idea of diversification, they definitely want to hear from basically everyone that they can at this point who has an interesting take on what's going on in the world. That niche, I think, is going to serve you really, really well, especially if you have a niche within a niche, which is something that I always try to essentially convince people in workshops to figure out what their niche within the niche is. Just sort of being able to find a way to actually make clear in the current news cycle how your niche fits into the overall purpose of the publication. And that sounds a little bit abstract, but actually, so for us, right, like right now, or not so much right now, but 2 months ago, every single pitch that I got was about coronavirus. And there's a reason for that. It's because that's, the thing that's taking over the news cycle, was taking over the news cycle 2 months ago. To the point that there were times when things were sort of being awkwardly shoved in, and the freelancing coronavirus conversation can really only go so far. But if you find a way to smoothly discuss what your niche is in the current ongoing news cycle, then actually that's going to be something that will serve you really, really well. So find that niche, make it very clear, find a way to pitch in terms that actually will immediately make sense to the editor, and come with a couple of ideas that you think will work for that specific magazine, or that specific publication. But the most important thing that I would say is that I think in this process comes out is an understanding of the publication and what the purpose of the publication is. And also, proofread your emails, because I had someone literally this morning accidentally call us the Freelance Corner, which is Ipsy's magazine that does a very similar thing to us. And it's never a great look. But yeah, proofread your pitches as well. But yeah, look, I think just to build on that niche as much as you can, and then fit it into the purpose of the publication that you're sending to.
If I can just add to that. Yeah, completely agree with that. Definitely knowing the publication you're pitching to is super, super important. And it is good to have lots of different niches. From the point of view of an editor, you want to be able to sort of apply your topic to different areas and sort of have a nice wide ranging coverage of that. One thing I would say is when you do pitch, not only make sure you really understand who you're pitching to and what they're covering, but also keep your pitches as short as you can, make them really nice and succinct, just because I as an editor get literally thousands of emails every week to the point where I always have stuff waiting to be read. And if people sometimes pitch to me things that is equivalent of sort of 2 sides of A4, I'm not going to have time to read that. So yeah, keep it really tight and to the point, and that will really help.
And can I recommend 2 resources, if that's all right? Presspad is an amazing organisation, and they're doing a lot of outreach work now because of the pandemic. Every Friday they have a pitch clinic. You send your pitch in as you would send it to an editor. Over Zoom, you get someone to basically proofread it, tell you what's good, what's bad, they adjust it, and they sometimes give you contacts as well. In terms of places to pitch, I would suggest Film Stories. It's a small website. They do pay, and they basically have a whole page dedicated to pitching on their website. So they tell you exactly what they want. They say about niches. They say how to send your pitch, how to format it. They have every possible question you could want.
I hadn't heard of that. Could you actually post a link in the chats just so anyone else can access it? That's a really good resource. Actually, all the ones that you mentioned are fantastic. It's also good to know what to do with a pitch, because I think that is the most nerve-wracking thing when you're just starting out, that it is so scary to send it to somebody you don't know and potentially you hear nothing back and you kind of feel a little bit deflated, and it's not the best feeling. Another platform that I would probably recommend that I've used is Pitchwise, and I'll need to send a link to that as well. But on there you can answer different queries different editors have had on different stories and pitch to them, and you can actually see if your pitch has been seen. You can then follow up, and the platform actually prompts you to follow up, which is really, really good, and it'll template it all for you. So if you're starting out, it is really, really good, and it's worldwide. So if you're looking for work outside of the UK, it is also fantastic. I will jump on another question we've had in the Q&A. It's had 2 thumbs up. So anonymous attendee, I don't know who you are, but they're asking, can you be a successful journalist today without having a Twitter account? Who wants to take that one first?
I can jump on that. Yes, you can. I do have a Twitter account. I have only started using it in the last year, and mainly because it does help. Like, realistically, having a Twitter account does help, but you don't need to do it. And I spent about 7 years of my career not bothering with one, and it was fine. It speaking to as to how relevant it is, but I do know plenty of journalists that don't use Twitter at all and do fine. It's really about finding a method that works for you, for how you engage with your readers and how you engage with other members of the industry, and that doesn't have to be through Twitter at all.
Fantastic. Lydia or Jack, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, that was literally the most recent piece that that we published on Underpin was about journalists not having a Twitter account. That really, really fun piece. I'll link it into the chat as well. The outcome, I think, for Louisa Quick, who wrote it, was no. It was the same as Lucy's, which was no, but it helps. I think a lot of emphasis is placed on sort of having fun, hot takes on Twitter as well, and I think that's what people are thinking of when they're like, yeah, like, oh, I have to be able to totally make Donald Trump look like an idiot in order to have 208 characters or less in order to have a successful journalism career, which I will outright say, like, absolutely you do not. And in fact, a lot of people will just avoid you like the plague if you become one of those. But I think being able to, Twitter is really useful for some things, certainly, even if you have a very quiet Twitter account, which is what essentially I have. And so a big part of what I do at Underpinned is I actually go through, basically over the weekends, I go through Twitter and find call-outs for publications looking for journalists, and reroute them to people to our jobs board and to people in our community as well who are looking for work. And I do think it is useful for that. So I guess I kind of disagree with you, Lucy, in the sense that in some ways you definitely don't need it. I don't think you need to be super active on there. And if you're able to find work off of it, then great. But I do think while you don't need it, it is helpful for seeing who's out there, seeing who's pitching, and seeing more specifically the most up-to-date call outs that they have specific to current situations. So I would suggest having one, and I would suggest using it every once in a while, especially when you're sort of in a gap and understanding how it works. And I would also suggest, if I can do a little self-push, reading that most recent piece on the Underbid website as well, as just for a better idea of what we're talking about.
I don't really have anything to add to that, too. Truth be told, it's like they've plucked out the thoughts of my head, to be honest.
Do you not enjoy Twitter, Lydia?
Sorry?
Do you not enjoy Twitter?
Not really, but I do use it. So as a freelancer, I think sometimes in terms of news cycles and trying to get commissioned and still be the hot take person, so to speak, Twitter can be just an overwhelming place at times, and there's all sorts of people troll a lot, and it can be not a very nice platform at times. The way I use it is to use TweetDeck. So all my tweets that I have to promote, they're all scheduled a week in advance, and sometimes I just tweet through TweetDeck, so I don't actually have to see what's on there. It's alright. It's alright as a platform, but it's not my favourite thing, truth be told.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. There are some, as I think that there are with most social media platforms nowadays, there are some really negative sort of spaces on it, which interestingly is in the news cycle right now, because in the US they've just, scrapped a lot of the more incendiary political profiles on there, which, good riddance in a lot of ways. I do think that it's also in the same way that like every other social media profile on that platform, and that you sort of make what you get out of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
for sure. I think moving away from social a little bit and more back into pitching, I have had a couple of questions through, so I'm going to almost merge them into one. So one person's asking how sustainable is freelancing as a career path, but also an extension to it, I would also add the other question, which is about, is it better to have a fully written piece or other kind of general queries for pitching? So how would you go about it, and how sustainable is it as a career path?
In terms of pitching, don't send full pieces. That's pretty much every editor I've ever met has said that as the first rule, and pretty much only the only rule: do not send the full piece at once. For instance, what happens if they just say, no, we won't use this? Your hard work has gone to waste, and that time you could spend, that time spent writing the piece that's lost. As a freelancer, your time is your greatest asset. You can't really you can't afford to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, Lucy, do you often get people submitting full articles, or what's kind of the procedure you see?
Very rare. We get it. It's, primarily people just pitch sort of basic stuff, and that is what I would prefer as well. Particularly also as when we're usually commissioning for a couple of weeks in advance. So I'd rather people take the time to tailor it than sort of write something on spec. But yeah, the other thing I would say is that sometimes we will turn people down, not because we don't think their stuff is good, but because we don't have the budget for it that month. And that's an unfortunate reality of editorial operations, that sometimes you just don't have the cash to pick up that stuff. And if people are writing things on spec for you, or, writing things and sending them to fully written pieces, it feels awful to say to them, oh, I'm sorry, but but it is unfortunately something we have to do. It's part of my job to make sure we don't go over budget. So
yeah. Definitely the least fun part of the job in a big way is budgeting in general, but also being like, this is actually an excellent piece, but we can't afford to put it out there. which is sad, but you sort of, it is one of the things that you sign on to, I guess, in a lot of ways, is that editorial idea of the business as a whole, rather than just the product that you're trying to create. I think, look, and the other aspect to this as well is that, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about finding the niche and understanding the publication, is that if you write a long piece and then send it to an editor, there is a large chance that actually it may not fit the spirit of the publication, or it may not actually fit the tone, or it may not be relevant to the publication as a whole, because you haven't written it. Maybe you have written it with the publication in mind, but you haven't written it with the editorial process in your head as well. But just on the second part of the question about freelancing being a sustainable career, I think Lydia would agree with me that it absolutely can be, and that like a lot of people do make it work. I think that my advice would, in all honesty, be to, and I get this is not what a lot of people want to hear, but my advice would honestly be, straight out of uni, go and find work, ideally in the industry that you want to freelance in, and then go and freelance. Go and make some connections, go and actually understand the way that, the process works, go and learn a little bit more. And I wish that universities would give this experience a little bit more, but that's a bit of a separate thought out there. But yeah, I think go and spend 2-3 years learning, maybe not even that much, but 2 or 3 years in my mind is sort of the perfect amount of time, learning actually what the process looks like and how, and even if you're not thinking about journalism, just all sorts of freelancing. So like if you're thinking about design or marketing or whatever, learn what the industry wants, get some connections, and then go off on your own and do what I think is a pretty exciting, cool thing, and become your own boss.
I'd echo that. It's after I finished my NC2J, I went straight to freelancing. I really wish I hadn't. I'm still in the same position 2 years later on. I remember being on the course and thinking that I wanted to be a reporter and that I would like to work for a newspaper because I wanted to be a features writer, rather than sort of freelancing can be very ad hoc at times, and it's very sort of not stable, really.
Yeah, we get that quite a lot. And actually, just following on, because you're talking about university there, and NCTJ, we've got a question from Emma. She says, how essential is the NCTJ? I'm at university doing a degree. Do I need it to get a job in journalism?
So there are, in my opinion, the NCTJ is probably more useful than a degree in some circumstances, only because you've got the very specific skill sets. So you have media law, you have court reporting, you have shorthand, that's not necessarily taught when it comes to an English degree. In terms of going into a courtroom, you need to be able to have the quotes from what's being said down 100%. Otherwise, if you're in a newsroom, you're not really fit to be sent into a courtroom, because you could potentially, the paper that you're working for could be brought into quite a not very nice situation if it's in contempt of court, for instance. It depends largely on the paper and the editor's preference, though. I find some, I'm just trying to remember, the NCTJ, funnily enough, has some research about this, but degrees are becoming more popular, but the NCTJ is still sort of in the background. It's one of the things that people look for a lot, as well as, weirdly enough, I keep seeing job ads that say NCTJ, 100 words a minute, and a driving license.
That would strike fear into so many people's hearts, because that is a lot of requirements right off the bat.
Yeah.
Just going to say, I don't have 100 words a minute shorthand, and I can't actually drive, so.
Yeah. And actually, just on that, yeah, I think at best I manage 60 words a minute, and I do have a driving license, but I don't have an NCTJ. My course was PTC accredited, which places less focus on some of the more traditional side of journalism, is more for magazine-based journalism, which I really liked and was really good. In terms of what different people require, I would say journalism is a very broad church. There's a lot of different types of titles. There's a lot of business titles that really aren't heavily discussed in courses at all. There's a lot of digital stuff. Most of them won't put the same requirements on that, say, a print newspaper will. And it's important within that to, just because one set of job adverts for one type says, oh, you need this, doesn't mean you're going to need that for all of it. And I know plenty of people with absolutely no qualifications at all who work in it and are very, very good. And I've also worked with people who had all the qualifications but were ultimately not very good at it because they didn't really apply themselves in a way, or, you know, they didn't really have the sort of natural skills that made them a good fit for it. I think it's far more important to have the drive to improve and the kind of hunger for it than it is a specific set of skills. And you will find different editors have different preferences, but I certainly wouldn't think, oh, I haven't got this, that means there's no way I can get into this at all. There are a lot of different routes into it.
I think that's so true, Lucy. Like, I think that like that's the exact point that I was going to make in a big way. I think the NCTJ is not perfect in many ways. Like, I was looking at their website while I was preparing for this, and I noticed that they had several courses that hadn't been updated since at least 2018, which is, I don't know what that's a sign of. I hope that nobody's on here whose feelings are hurt by that, because I you know, that's not my goal. But I think that it's really important to note, at Lydia's point as well, about the you know, 100-word shorthand, have a driving license, you have to be NCTJ accredited. In recruitment in general, not just in journalism, you can have millions and millions of accreditations. You can, you know, spend thousands and thousands of pounds a year on going and getting and doing courses, and I think that that's a great thing. Like, I don't want to take away from that 100%, and I think that people who are beyond university and school trying to educate themselves is a really powerful, useful tool. But I think, to Lucy's point, the value of having someone who is able to build up a strong hypothetical that they can argue well, who is understanding of the news cycle, who has a niche that is specific to the publication that they work for, and they understand that niche, who actually can formulate an argument over, you know, however many words you need, and then display it in a way that actually makes sense and is also entertaining, depending on the publication that you're working on. Those things are so much more powerful than having an NCTJ, and are also, you are missing out for people who are hiring, and I'm uber aware of this because I'm constantly looking for writers. You are missing out on so many interesting and thoughtful pieces of work and so many interesting and thoughtful potential staff writers as well, if that's what you're looking for, by having some of those expectations. So again, we've gone back to it, like, you know, I think that the skill set needs to be diversified in a way that you are not just hiring a homogenous workforce, that it all has the same accreditation and all, you know, it's the same understanding, and instead that you're actually bringing people from different backgrounds with different perspectives in order to create an interesting and viable publication.
It's interesting you say that, Mila. Before we started recording, you mentioned the Braille shorthand.
I did.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I can remember prior to starting the NCTJ course I did, there was controversy. I think he had cerebral palsy, but he basically could not write because he was unable to. However, this person had I think it was something like a first class degree. He got the T1 thing or whatever it is, and it was from some university such as Oxford, I think. It was in English, and there was a controversy because he was told he couldn't do a NCTJ course because he wouldn't be able to do a shorthand. Right, but the thing is, he's probably better than the course teaches you to be already, because of simply the breadth of the experience he was doing. As far as my recollection, I think he was eventually accepted onto the course. It was adapted for him, But in making requirements stringent enough like that, you are missing out on far, far more. I remember to give you an example, I used to work for Byline Media and I used to cover the thalidomide scandal. I met a thalidomide woman and she had 4 shortened arms and she had fused fingers and some fingers were missing. However, she was a trained touch typist. And she was telling me how, despite the fact that she is qualified and she was really good at what she did, people wouldn't hire her simply because of the state that her hands were in. You are missing out on so much if the requirements are that stringent that you can't see past that line, I think.
Absolutely.
For sure. It was actually earlier on, when you talk about missing out on talent, we did have a comment in earlier from Morgan, and she said it's really refreshing to hear from somebody who didn't attend university and is part of the autistic community. Would love to hear more about how student media organisations can support the autistic community further. I suppose, Lydia, it would be most useful to come to you first, but I imagine Jack and Lucy also have a lot of thoughts on that. Would you get so many questions about diversifying the workforce? And it's exactly that, you're missing out on so much talent and want to find ways to fix that.
I think in terms of accessibility, as we were saying, the requirements could be dropped. I'm not really familiar with student publications, so do correct me if this is wrong. I don't really have a background in that and I don't really know a lot about it. I'm assuming that there are interviews for positions. Right, job interviews are like, they are kryptonite. They are the worst thing ever, and I would rather be the one asking the questions. If you have someone who says that they are on the spectrum and are applying for a position, maybe consider adapting the interview process. So if you do go with the interview option, send them the questions in advance so they know exactly what to say. Or you could maybe, I forget the technical term, but it's where they show you basically their skill set. You give them a test, like a writing test, and say, okay, go away and do that, show me what you've got, rather than relying on the interview.
Yeah.
I think that's about the extent I can answer that question.
No, that's absolutely fair. Lucy, you do a lot of hiring. Do you ever find that there are barriers like that, and what do you do at Verdict?
Yeah, I don't think we've had a major problem with people on the spectrum, although we have got colleagues who are. I think it's more, we do a writing test, and I think that's really helpful. I've had also done interviews with mainly to help colleagues in other departments with people who are deaf and things like that. And there are organisations who will kind of provide people to assist in those situations, which is great, and it's something that our company makes use of in that situation, which is really good. I would say actually in terms of, it's sort of just going back to the question about how student media organisations can contribute to that. The only other thing I would say is that student media places, and totally understandably, a lot of focus on consumer media and getting people kind of experience writing for sort of other sort of things on consumer topics. The problem is that the main journalism industry is more than half of it is business media, and that's really where there is still a lot of jobs. That's where a lot of people go into, and the people that end up being, a lot of the people who end up being really sort of high profile writers on the nationals often have a path that goes through business media in the start. And if students aren't helping their sort of fellow students get into media by those paths too, the diversity of those paths is going to be less strong than it is on the ones that the students are focusing on. So I think that obviously there is a massive responsibility from publishers to be recruiting well as well, but being aware that those are there and targeting those as well and applying to those as well will really help. And I think, basically those are not as focused on, so people kind of forget to check whether they're as diverse because people are less aware of them, but they are such an important part of the industry and they ultimately shape the rest of the industry a huge amount.
Yeah, I don't think that, as well, not just for student publications, but for everyone, I think that there is no easy solution here. It's very, very dependent on hirers actually taking the time, I think, here to really, really think about who they're they're talking to, who is trying to work with them, and understanding them in a way that goes beyond the the basic call out on a job board, or in the Guardian news, in the Guardian job area that they have. I think that for student publications as well, like I think it's not just, it's the consumer media point, I think is so true, Lucy, and I remember my frustration leaving university and just being like, in my head being like, there's like 10 publications in the UK, and then of course being like, wait, there's this whole other side of the sort of B2B media that no one's really talking about. And I think that's a really important point. But on top of that as well, I think that I say this, and I don't want student publications to lose out on this thing, because I think it's one of the best things about them, but they are very, very social, very, very socially led groups. And I think there is an element of discomfort for some people who are dealing with anxiety or mental health, or that they feel the pressure in order to be a part of the publication, they have to conform to the social standards that exist within it. And actually that very much reflects the way that a lot of work culture it sort of builds up on itself, as well as that in order to actually be successful within the company that you're working for, you need to continuously function really well in the work culture there. And that is something that I do think that, and it's really refreshing as well, looking at the younger generation and actually seeing, God, I feel so old saying that, sorry. Looking at the students now and actually seeing that is something that they are so much more aware of. And I don't know if Lucy has noticed this as well, but like they're so much more aware of this problem than I was when I was a student. That actually not everyone wants to go to the pub and get drinks after work, and actually being inclusive of everybody who actually does want to be a part of a student publication beyond the actual work part of it, because that is such an important skill that actually does carry on into the workplace after university is over as well.
Totally. And earlier, Lydia, you kind of asked me about how student publications actually work in regard to hiring their teams. And it does vary. So we mentor different publications across UK and Ireland, and there's different procedures that go into each one. We are due to come to time, so I'm going to make this point very, very quick. But I do think it's important to note that a lot of student publications do it by process of interview. So you do just show up and you chat to, it's normally an external person and somebody internal to the publication. But there are also publications that will do it by vote, where they do it like an election. So you stand for the election and you try and get votes from peers and so on and try and win the role. Some roles are paid and some are not. So there's quite a range within the UK and Ireland. But a question that kind of leads on into that is a really popular one we've had that's come in, is how do you pitch when you have no prior bylines besides student media? So how credible really is it when, if you know, for example, you're an employer and you see that a publication, that's the only experience they've ever had, and you don't know much about how the publication runs, does that really affect the overall hiring process? Would you be penalised if you didn't have bylines and anything bigger, I suppose, in a student publication?
If you're pitching, go on.
So, I was going to say, if you're pitching for freelance, the most important thing is the pitch you're making, not who you've written for. Yeah, sorry, Lydia, you carry on.
It's funny that you say it, because I was about to say almost the same thing verbatim.
Good.
In terms of the actual pitch itself, I think I've noticed more and more that people who are asking for pitches will not take anything unless you have links, there's always some sort of stipulation. They say, if you don't have any links and you have like a Twitter feed, or if you have a blog or anything like that, link to it. And the idea behind that, I think, is to make your presence known, to sort of establish yourself. It shouldn't really matter if it's student media, I think. If you just say, hi, editor's name, my name is so-and-so, I am a such and such journalist, I have had bylines in, and then link to them, and then say, I have a pitch for you, pitch it, sign off. I don't think it would really matter. Just make sure you link, because oh my god, if you don't, sometimes I've had editors who penalise me saying, oh, your picture's really good, but you didn't send us any links to what you do, and you didn't like put your Twitter feed or anything, so we don't know who you are. Sorry, we're not taking it. Just be warned.
That's actually really useful to know. I think a lot of people would shy away from sharing even social media sometimes.
I think if you're freelance, you have to be sort of not confrontational, but very upfront about who you are, what you do. These are the pieces I write, that sort of thing. It's a lot of the commissions I take come from the fact that I have networked with people or that I found them on Twitter. But you have to be, it's kind of almost like who shouts loudest wins almost, sadly.
Jack,
Yeah.
is that something that you find as well with Underpinned and the people that you work with?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, I agree with Lucy now, because I learned the lesson the hard way. That I used to be impressed by, I used to, like, and I cringe to say it, I used to be impressed by the size of the bylines that people sent in, and be like, oh wow, very cool, you know, that's great. And got burnt enough, essentially, that, and then not only got burnt, but actually was, because one of the things that I really wanted to do when I started Underpinned and still want to do today is essentially say, I want to give, you know, young, new, vibrant journalists a chance to have a really, to be able to write about something that they're excited about. And I want to sort of bring new faces into this a little bit more, rather than just relying on the same people. And that I sort of had the same realization, I think, when I just, the moment of realization of like, actually, I've had so many quality pieces from people who just have never had bylines before, because they're actually just good writers and they actually really put some thought and time into this piece, and that the same vice versa, that I've had terrible experiences, not just in terms of quality of writing, but actually in terms of working relationships with people who have done incredible work for other publications. So look, and so I think my main takeaway is, I agree with Lucy, is that the pitch is the most important thing. That being said, try to find some writing that's relevant. It doesn't have to even be in a student publication. Like, but like, if you're sending, I don't know, if you're sending a publication, a pitch to Vice, don't include your essay on 16th century romantic poetry, because they're just not, you know, you can have as many hot takes on Byron as you want, they're not gonna care. But I think that's the main takeaway for me, at least, was that you know, the bylines, what you've done before is cool, but it's not the most important thing. It's very much about what you're presenting to me now, and the quality of the idea that you have now.
Thank you so much. I think that is unfortunately all the time we have. There are still a few questions coming in, but I have linked our coffee shop table. We're table 2. As we wrap up here, if you want to continue the conversation a bit more, obviously attendees, panelists, everybody is welcome to come to that. And if you have any friends who missed the session but are available from now, certainly come along to that coffee chat. That one isn't recorded, so if you want to share any experiences or anything else, that is the lovely place to do it, and chat and socialize and meet people and do some of that networking that is not on Twitter. With that said, thank you all so much for joining us for this session, and a huge thank you obviously to Jack, Lucy and Lydia for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much.